Hi, welcome to End Credit Reviews. On episode of After the Credits on End Credit Reviews. It's just me, Tyler, from End Credit Reviews this time. And this is my review on the movie I Am Legend, which is hard to believe that movie is about 10 years old now. So anyway, I Am Legend is based off the Richard Matheson book of the same name. And it's not the first time it was adapted into a movie. We had that Vincent Price movie called The Last Man on Earth, and no, I'm not talking about that mediocre show that's somehow still on TV. And then there was also the 1970s movie, The Omega Man, which I haven't seen that one. It was with Charlton Heston. I still have to get around to watching that. Anyway, this is the third adaptation of that book. It was directed by Francis Lawrence, who is also known for directing the pretty good movie Constantine, and also the Hunger Games sequels, which I gotta say is definitely not his best work, but this movie is definitely his best work. So basically, a disease has spread around the world and has killed most people except for Robert Neville, played by Will Smith, and he has to go around New York City with his dog as his companion and trying to avoid all these monsters who are hunting him. And he's also at the same time trying to find a cure to save them. Now, I remember seeing this movie on New Year's Eve when it came out, and I really liked this movie a lot. This movie definitely left sort of an impact on me, and I wasn't 100% sure why for a long time until recently I realized that I could relate to Robert Neville's character with him being lonely and isolated because a lot of the summer times when I was just there was like no school and that I would just just stay at home, and I didn't really have too many friends. I was kind of isolated. I didn't really wasn't very sociable, so I could definitely relate to his character. In a way, I can't believe it took me that long to realize that. I just really didn't think about it. But anyway, what makes this movie really work is the lead. If they would have gotten someone like Jai Courtney, who's like not that good of an actor, if they would have gotten like him, who's like a flatline, it just would not have worked. But Will Smith really brought his A game to it. I don't think he's like one of the best actors ever, but Will Smith is a pretty good actor, and it's definitely one of his best performances, I've got to say. Now, what's interesting is that the dog character is treated as one of the main characters. The dog was not in the book. It's not for the purpose of, oh, look how cute the dog looks. It's actually something that's really important because it keeps Robert Neville in a way of trying to keep him sane and also as a companion. Now, when it comes to deaths of animals in movies, I'm not that emotionally stirred by them, but this is the one movie I can think of that really did it for me. And then people are like, Old Yeller is so sad. I mean, not really, because of the fact that when he killed the dog, it was just quick and painless with a gun. In this one, he strangles the dog to death. He feels the life being drained from him. And on top of that, what really drives it home is when he goes to the video store, it just really emphasizes how alone he really feels. Another pretty impressive thing about this movie is all the shots of New York City. I mean, they try to film some scenes in New York City in itself, but a lot of it was shot in studio, and it was pretty impressive all the effects they were able to achieve. In fact, everyone seems to talk about that Batman vs. Superman poster in Times Square. I mean, it was kind of an Easter egg by one of the writers of this movie that was originally hired to write a Batman vs. Superman script back in the early 2000s, which, I'm not kidding, just look it up. I mean, I think you can find the script online somewhere. But anyway, now let me talk about some of the differences between the book and the movie. I eventually got around to reading the book, and I definitely recommend it. Now, one interesting polar opposite difference between the book and the movie is that in the book, Robert Neville is a white guy who lives on the West Coast. However, in the movie, Robert Neville's a black guy who's living on the East Coast. I know they're kind of like two polar opposite differences, but it doesn't really affect the story at all. However, the one biggest difference between Robert Neville's character in the book and in the movie is that in the book, Robert Neville was going out of his way to hunt these monsters at daytime. However, in the movie, Robert Neville is trying to find a cure so he can pretty much have these monsters to go back to normal. Speaking of people, he eventually comes across these new people, but what's weird is that he's been wanting for other people like him, but he has a hard time like processing it, which was kind of odd but pretty interesting. I also like this conversation he has with Alice Braga, I think that's how you pronounce her name, character. How it's pretty much like a pessimist versus an optimist of like, science and religion, how one's thinking like, oh, everything's all right, everything has a purpose, and Robert Neville's like, no, we did this thing, and which I did like that kind of minor subplot of like a conflict and that sort of kind of like yin-yang dynamic. Now with this movie, of course, everyone talks about the ending, or rather endings of this movie, so if you haven't seen this movie, I highly recommend to just fast forward to this part, but if you have seen the movie, then just continue. Now pretty much there are two endings. Now the theatrical ending is when Robert Neville decides to commit suicide and blow himself up with the other monsters and gives a cure to Alice's character, and they pretty much go to this colony of people who survived and thus saves mankind. And then the alternate ending is when pretty much the monsters kind of say like, we just wanted this girl back, and they're trying to emphasize like Robert's like the monster, and then he goes into a car and drives away with the other human characters into the sunset. I'm sorry, but why do people love the alternate ending so much? I know the whole thing about people say like, oh, it's trying to show that Robert Neville was like the monster in that. But the thing is that would have worked if they were true to the story, whereas like, oh, Robert Neville was going around killing monsters. That's fine. That would have worked. It would have made sense. But in this movie, he's actually saving these monsters, and how exactly is he a monster for trying to save these monsters? Even if they went with the alternate ending, it just would have opened up some big plot holes, like, okay, these monsters try to communicate with Robert, why didn't they try to communicate with them earlier in the movie? And second is that even if they just wanted the girl back and they didn't want to kill Robert, at least the alpha character did, then why did the alpha character send dogs after Robert's character, like the mutated dogs after, to kill him? On top of that, I just feel like the alternate ending version is just way too cookie cutter. I mean, it really does divert from the rest of the tone of the movie, how dark and depressing it was. I mean, even in the book, Robert Neville does commit suicide, just like he does in the theatrical version. Okay, so what I'm trying to get here is that what makes more sense to be called I Am Legend? A guy who pretty much died but found a cure to save humanity, or a guy who pretty much wasted his time and went in a car and drove away? Now, if there was one thing that I didn't like about this movie, it would have to be the CGI, mainly on like the monster characters, because I don't know, it just kind of reminded me of a mix between Imhotep and the Scorpion King monster from The Mummy Returns. I mean, I can't give The Mummy Returns a little bit of a pass on this one because that was made in the early 2000s, and this one was like the late 2000s, and it had a lot more money to work with, so I feel like it was kind of more of a disappointment, I would have to say. But overall, I Am Legend is a great movie. I highly recommend it, and I also highly recommend the book if you haven't read that one. I mean, I kind of wish this would have gotten a prequel like they were originally thinking about, but it's likely going to get readapted again. And if they do, I mean, just make it like Bram Stoker's Dracula, where you try to be accurate to the book as much as possible. Because if you don't and you want to do something too different, then what's the point besides just a blatant profit? So anyway, I give I Am Legend about 3.5 stars out of 4. So anyway, this is Tyler from End Critter Reviews on episode of After the Credits. I really hope you enjoyed this episode of After the Credits, and I hope to make a lot more in the future. Please like and subscribe.